We're here with Millennium Live at the Transformational CISO West Coast Assembly. I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Howard, the retired Chief Security Officer at Microsoft. Mike, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nick, for having me.
So you've had a very interesting career. How did you go from police officer, you worked in the CIA, and what led you to be your most recent role, which as Chief Security Officer at Microsoft?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I had 22 years at CIA, and I had been what they call a chief of station, so I ran a particular territory, actually here in the U.S. And a lot of factors. My then wife, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, she was retired from the agency. I had some ongoing assignments, but our mothers, both who were in California, weren't getting any younger. And I'd basically done everything I wanted to do in the agency. And so we decided we need to get back to the West Coast. And I reached out to a friend of mine who I'd served with in the Philippines. He was with what they now call NCIS. Back then it was called NIS, Naval Investigative Service. And we worked a lot of things together. He was the only one I knew from the public sector that had made it in the private sector. Okay. And so I just pinged him. He had led me to a headhunter who eventually led me to Microsoft. And the opportunity there was to run the executive protection unit for Bill Gates and some of the execs. And that's actually how I landed at Microsoft.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you were obviously our keynote speaker last night at the gala dinner. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
So you talked about Batman versus Superman. Mm-hmm. First of all, which you prefer, but in relation to the CISO versus the CSO, could you just elaborate on that a little more?
Sure. I prefer Batman. Just because he's.
I'm with you.
Yeah. He's got to do it on his own, right? He's got no powers from planet Krypton. But yeah. So when we show that slide, it basically means that I'm not looking at it from a personality standpoint, but I think just structurally. And sort of in many cases, it's sort of the ecosystem of the cyber side of the house and the physical side of the house, where baked into enterprises is kind of this. Yeah, we're in security, but we're doing different things. So that's where the versus comes into it. It doesn't necessarily have to mean an antagonistic environment, which you can sometimes. But in this case, I'm really referring to the fact that you've got kind of two siloed organizations, like I said last night, who meet when they need to, when a big thing happens and they go back into their corners. And eventually, if you get to the point where you have a holistic end-to-end kind of take on security, then you get the partnership between Superman and Batman. Yep.
So when you became a CSO, you obviously have a very wide scope role, covering everything that touches security risk at your organization. What makes a CSO or even a CISO successful?
Yeah, I think it really comes down first to the people. When I got into Microsoft, it was a much smaller organization in terms of global security, then called corporate security. We had, I don't know, maybe 19, 20 people globally, and they were all my direct reports initially. And all well-meaning people, but based on the strategy of where the company was going and where I wanted to take global security, which is regionalize it, expand it, grow. Some people were not prepared for that. The bottom line is for a CISO or a CSO, it comes down to the people. You have to have that good team, and it takes a while to vet that team. It took me a better part of a year to actually find the right people for my leadership team, the right people to place in our regional roles. Some people were there already, and they were really great. Other people we need to find, and really build that nucleus. Okay. Probably just behind that, obviously, is coming up with a strategy. You're putting out a lot of fires at first when you take on a role like this because you're new at it. You're still learning the players, in the C-suite and everything. And then, of course, when stuff happens from a security perspective, you're closer to the scene as you're building a team and building a new entity to actually stomping out the fires and triaging a security situation. Later on, of course, if you build the right team, then you're more strategic. Yep. But at some point, you've got to focus on strategy. Where do you want to take that organization in the next year, 2, 3 years out? And what do you have to do to get there? So really, it's team first, It's got to be the people, because you can't do it on your own. And then just about right behind that is developing a coherent strategy that maps to your company's strategy. And that's, I think, if you get those things right, then in the long run you'll be successful.
So on that, so a lot of people think security is reactive, but how do the C-suite managing security for huge enterprises like Microsoft be proactive, and what does it take to be to set yourself up for success?
Yeah, I think the first thing is they call it pounding a lot of shoe leather, right? So a successful CSO and CISO need to do that in the beginning. You need to get to know the folks in the C-suite, the people who are going to be able to provide you with air cover, provide you with support, provide you with funding, and really kind of buy in on your program so that you can drive those programs in the enterprise. But you've got to, instead of being so reactive, you have to understand what their business drivers are, what their business strategies are. For instance, if a particular CVP, EVP decides that his or her business unit, or they're going to expand in a particular part of the world, right? And they're going to have a X times 2 times 3 footprint. If you didn't know that ahead of time, you wouldn't be able to position the right people in that particular region, the right intelligence sources, the right kind of connections with the local government and law enforcement, et cetera, as well as with the State Department, the U.S. Embassy, where we get a lot of information from, ahead of time, so that you can kind of forecast what kind of situations and problems that particular business unit might have. So a lot of times people will build security entities, but again, it's reactive. And there's a certain part of that which will always be reactive. But if you understand the business strategies, that's why I said last night, we are business people first. Our business happens to be security, and we're business enablers. If you can get that into the DNA of your teams, and then you as the leader of the team, make sure you understand where the company is going and get to have those relationships with those folks in the C-suite. It makes you better able as an organization to be more proactive and really think about how are you going to forestall an incident from happening. Sure, there's technology, and like I mentioned it last night, that we have and that we're also baking into the equation that hopefully will help us be more predictive in where things are going to happen with machine learning and AI. But like I said, everything else comes down to the human element and the relationships.
So on the AI, machine learning, voice, all these new technologies that are coming everywhere, how do executives optimize the value of these type of technologies, not just in the security but aspect of it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've seen it in different forums, even at Microsoft, where some particular business person or leader will talk about that they've enhanced their particular line of business through digital transformation. But what they've done is maybe and it's been good, but they've put a bot kind of solution here somewhere along that process, which helps to get that particular part of the process more efficient. But as I think I again mentioned last night, it's an end-to-end solution, digital transformation. So executives, I think, embrace the idea of digital transformation. Again, I think you'll find that term is going to be used a lot, and it may lose its meaning at some point. But right now, I think people are using it as a catch-all for anything that has to do with technology enhancements via AI and machine learning, and all that other good stuff. I think the ones that truly understand that it's the end-to-end solution that you're looking at for a manual process and get it, those are the ones that are really embracing it. I think in general, most folks embrace it, but they look at it more as a solution to one-off situations. And that's fine for a tactical quick win. For the long-term strategy, that doesn't pan out.
So how is digital transformation affecting security organizations, and what do you recommend to your fellow C-suites who are looking to implement holistic security programs in their organizations?
Yeah, I think I kind of liken it to the cloud back over a decade ago,
Yeah.
right? And as the cloud was coming into existence, you had, we're blessed because we're in the technology industry. Not that Microsoft and our organization had all the answers, but that was sort of our bailiwick. A lot of my counterparts in the security world, that's not their bailiwick, and so. Understanding the cloud and understanding the ramifications of the cloud downrange, it took them a while to get there. Now, of course, everybody's kind of embraced the cloud because that's here and it's going to stay here. So it's the same thing with all the things that we talk about in digital transformation, all the things that can help enhance the security operation. I think you have people in different kind of stages in their growth. You have those that don't really understand it, don't really want to understand it, and so it's still more the brick and mortar, hard access controls, kind of command and control, blah, 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 very manual process kind of organization. And it may work, but it's like I said, what got you here won't get you there last night, and so it may work. You have other folks that are they've got a very good GSOC process. They've got a smooth running operation with great technology. They're ready to think about the next iteration, which would be, true digital transformation, where you're looking at manual processes and how do you digitize those things to make yourself more efficient. I think in general, there's a lot of talk about it. I think you have to, again, crawl, walk, and run. I think you have to understand it first. I think there's a huge education piece that needs to be done within the CSO community about what this actually means. There's a hunger for cyber, as I talked about last night, and there's, on the CSO world, they really need to understand and want to know what cyber is all about, what the threats are, and what they can do. But there are also tools that they can use at their disposal from a digital transformation standpoint that can help them. But they have to really study, understand what does this mean, and how does it mean, and how does it work in our organization? What's the appetite of that particular company for it? I mean, their own C-suite leaders may not really understand it and may not have embraced it, and so you may be actually leading the way, and which is actually a good thing if you understand what it's all about. We actually did that at Global Security at Microsoft, in which we really put ourselves out there. We're still in the middle of changing our sort of modus operandi, so to speak, in terms of embracing the whole gamut of digital transformation, and how we do business. But we actually put it out there because we believe in it, and we believe this is the future, right? So I think it kind of runs the gamut. But like I said, it's a huge lift and a big education piece. But similar to the cloud, I guarantee 10 years from now, the vast majority of CSOs will be on board and will be on their way.
So speaking of looking to the future, it's early in 2019. What is the number one thing you're looking at in 2019 that could change the security landscape?
I don't want this to be a total Microsoft show, right? But I think some of the things that we've been working on, especially what we call, and one of my direct reports, sort of called it the frictionless environment.
Okay.
That is, looking at identity, as he calls it, at the edge. He can explain it a lot better than I can, but in essence, you're using biometrics and edge devices that are cloud-based, but also have the technology where you can get identity. In one case, we were demoed at multiple identities at sub 1 second speed, right? And be able to actually, through sensors and other means, capture the identity of somebody coming into your ecosystem before they even get to the doorway, before they get to the entranceway, as opposed to a card access, where the person's already in, hard access controls, those types of things. I think this will be a paradigm shift because it'll be a different way of thinking about security. I've talked to a lot of my colleagues who say, well, that's never going to work, right? Because you're still going to need walls and barriers and this and that. And I think what you'll have is a hybrid. That's what I see coming in 2019. You'll see digital transformation is going to move. And I know my old organization, which is under great hands, under Brian Tuscan, the current CSO, they're going to continue to push it forward, just like we did with the GSOCs back in the day when people said we couldn't have a string of integrated, interoperable GSOCs. We did. And so you're going to see some innovations in how people think about access control and identity.
Yep.
And I think that maps to where the industry, the technology industry is going, in terms of how they're thinking about it. And I really see some good innovations in that way. If nothing else, I see hopefully the security industry starting to not just say no or poo-poo it, but at least say, well, there might be something here in how some segments of the security industry are approaching the future of security. Otherwise, once again, I guarantee you, not that they have all the answers either, but on the CISO side of the house, because they're so wedded to technology, because that's their bread and butter, you're going to find that side of the house, and you would know better than I, that embracing those new technologies a lot faster because they have to defeat those technologies as well, and as well as defend them. And so I think, in order to make sure, once again, going back to the old thing about the partnership between CISO and CISO, you better speak the same language. You better know where they're going, and you better be able to map to that as well.
So part of that is also, what do you see as the biggest globally, the biggest threat, in 2019, 2020 and beyond? What's the biggest challenge for, any executive in security?
Believe it or not, and I've read a few studies, and I've come to embrace this, actually, is the whole idea of the climate. I think that's the biggest challenge because it directly also affects your security operations, right? Climate change in terms of the natural disasters that you're going to see more of, the kind of things that really would impact not only the human capital, the personnel that you have in different parts of the world, but also infrastructure, the critical infrastructure of your companies, whether it's offices or data centers, et cetera. I think that unless we kind of bake in the idea of climate change and how it affects your future strategies as a company, you're going to find yourselves, scrambling to do what we did, say like in Puerto Rico, right? You can't predict, for instance, the massive hurricane like Maria that hit. But maybe downrange, looking 2 or 3 years, as companies are looking to, we're going to build more data centers around the world, and we're going to put more of a footprint in these areas because, from a business standpoint, it makes sense. You also should bake in the fact that, okay, from a climate change aspect, who do we talk to kind of get some predictive kind of indicators on the likelihood of massive storms happening on a regular basis, massive changes in the ecology happening on a fairly regular basis that would directly affect commerce and how we do business, both from obviously the enterprise business standpoint, but certainly from the security standpoint. That's my personal feeling.
It's a very good perspective. So switching gears a little, we've been delighted to have you here in Vegas at the assembly. Mm-hmm. What is one of the key takeaways you found through your conversations? Obviously, your keynote last night, mm-hmm. From being here at the assembly.
Yeah, I think one of the main things was it's amazing. And I was telling my wife and my former business manager when we were chatting on text that. This is the first time I've been to a Millennium Alliance event, and thanks to you for introducing me to this segment of security. But it's interesting that we're all alike, right? Yeah. And I keep finding that out. There was one time, as an aside, I went to ISC West, another big show out here, and it's more of a security manufacturing and trade kind of thing, and a lot of my teams at the time, they were presenting on what we were doing from a technology perspective. But it was a side of the house that I had no exposure to. It was mostly because we're the end users, yep. And they're the ones that supply all the great stuff. And what I found out was I ended up on it was sponsored by the Security Industry Association, and I got on their board as the first end users, and it was eye-opening for me to be with these folks and to learn that part of the security world. And coming here, talking to the folks here and having conversations, A, yes, we're all in the security business. B, nobody has all the answers. And C, again, it opens up a new window for me and a new avenue of learning, because it's a constant learning. No matter how successful one is in your particular endeavors, you can always learn. And by just in the conversations I've had around the table last night during dinner and listening to people talking, you glean nuggets of information that I, as an end user, traditional kind of physical security CSO, wouldn't have. And that's the beauty of, I think, events such like this. Yeah.
And why do you think it's important for the C-suite executive to get out of the office, to get and to come and learn at assemblies like ours?
Oh, I think you can get yourself into a bubble where you believe your own BS about how good you are and how successful you are, and you may be that, but unless you get out and kind of see the world and taste it and interface with people that may have different backgrounds or have different viewpoints from you, have different pathways to success, you're always going to be in your own bubble, and maybe you don't innovate, right? One of the best things that ever happened to me was in the organization I mentioned last night, ISMA, International Security Management Association. Great organization, been there for a long time. I eventually went on some committees and then got on the board and eventually became president. That particular journey was an eye-opener, because at the time that happened, our global security organization, we were being touted as one of the best in the world. And people were benchmarking with us. We had presidents of countries and heavy hitters in the US government and everybody coming to benchmark with us. And so if we didn't get out, we could believe our own stuff, like, we're the greatest thing since sliced bread. But getting out in front of, running a board of, 15 or so of the top CSOs in the world, and finding out how they innovate, how they're doing things, and we realize, we didn't think about that. We should talk to them about that. It can make us better. It's the same thing. C-suite executives need to get out of that bubble, get out and even get to a point where they get uncomfortable and be challenged with what they thought was the end-all and be-all, right? And because then you innovate, then you come up with new ideas and ways of doing things, and you grow. You grow as a leader, your team grows, and hopefully, if you're like a CEO or whatever, then your company grows, right? But that's important.
Yeah. It's funny. So our CEO, his theme for this year is being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
And you kind of just touched on this, but how does that relate to the C-suite in security? Do people really need to be uncomfortable?
They do. I was reading an article on making speeches, actually. It kind of touched on this, where if you're making a speech, and try the analogy I'm trying to make. You make a speech, and there's two ways to view a speech. One is more communicative, and the other one is really just trying to impart information. The difference is that one is more, you're trying to memorize the speech, trying to and you get nervous and because you miss a point. Whereas the other one, they talk about improv people and how when people get on stage to improv, they actually don't know what's going to happen next, and they get uncomfortable, but they learn to adapt to the situation, right? And so then it makes for a better experience for them, because they're not trying to be so prescripted, and then it makes a better, obviously, thing for the audience. Being uncomfortable, I think, is important, though it's hard. Yeah. Everybody likes their own comfort zone, and again, as you go up the ladder of success, you like to stay in that comfort zone. That's kind of a DNA thing for humans, I think. You don't want to be uncomfortable. You don't want to be challenged. You don't want to be, hopefully, maybe faced with the fact that something that you're doing might be wrong or going down the wrong path. And it's something that you have to kind of embrace as a leader. Part of being a leader is being vulnerable. You have to have a certain amount of confidence in order to lead any organization. But you have to be vulnerable enough to be uncomfortable and be challenged with what you thought were sort of the holy grail of whatever thing the strategy that you're pushing. And I dare say that your best leaders are the ones that are vulnerable, are the ones that are willing to learn and to admit when they make mistakes and be willing to go course correcting, take another path. Those that don't, they'll end up hitting a brick wall at some point, frankly.
So what's next for Mike Howard? What's happening this year, and in your career in the security industry? Just
Yeah, that's a big question. I actually had a good friend of mine who's a professor at University of Washington tweet to me about after she had seen some comments on Twitter about the last night's event, and kind of said, well, sort of the next phase is starting to unravel for you now. And I guess for me, it's, I've had a great career and several careers in big enterprises. And now, the sort of consultant thing is something that will always be there, and I'm always willing to do that. But I'm really looking to talking about leadership more, talking about and mentorship. I'm really high in mentoring people and being mentored. So I like to do a lot of that in the future. Be on a few advisory boards, but also I'd like to write. I have things in my head, whether or not anybody will read them or not is another question, but I have things that I want to write about the industry, about leadership, about technology, and I want to blog about things. And so once we get situated in our new home in Las Vegas, and I have more time to do that, I'll devote more time to that. But I want to still contribute, and hopefully, and the other thing is that I want to make sure I still am in a learning mode. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be one of those legacy people that, oh yeah, Mike was relevant 2-3 years ago, but he's not relevant now. And forums like this and other things that help keep my brain cells sharp, are things that I want to continue to do.
So last question, what is your number one tip for 2019 for the C-suite executive?
I would say stay curious. It's going to be a hard enough environment from a business perspective, as you see on the news every day, whether it's trade wars or cybersecurity or economics going up and down or what have you. It's going to be hard enough, but you need to stay curious in order to survive. You need to stay curious about your people. You need to stay curious about where business is going. You need to stay curious about how well you're developing yourselves as leaders. And that's one thing I think that a lot of people are lacking that, I think, in the leadership world. A lot of people get to leadership because they're subject matter experts. Mm-hmm. We even saw that back in the CIA. I had great leaders there, but you saw those that they may have been great case officers, or in Microsoft's case, they may be great engineers and great this or that. And they're great at doing their job and getting the job done. They're not great leaders because they don't take the time to develop themselves as leaders, which means that admitting mistakes, learning from those mistakes, hopefully moving on, but the continuous improvement piece. And I think that's the one thing that people should be looking at. Stay curious, stay hungry.
Fantastic. Well, Mike Howard, it's been a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us here at the Transformational CISO Assembly, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
All right, thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
All right.